Hey, do you want to do the intro on this one? I think you should do the intro on this one. I want to hear that sexy voice of yours.
Think so. No.
ChukTomahawk.
I don't think so.
Come
man.
on.
I'm too high. Let me do it when I'm not high.
Dude, this is all going in the episode already.
Well, then that doubles down on what I was going to say. You're gonna have.
Why wouldn't you want to do the quip?
Because you're gonna be
easy.
like
it's
this,
right here.
like
it's
the whole
in big
time.
green letters.
But then when I actually do it, you're gonna get a whole different look on your face. You're gonna be like,
man, I swear, dude.
Do it any way you want,
dude,
man.
The listeners,
the
listeners want to hear you do the quip, man. They want to hear you do the intro. Look, that's why I put it in big green letters for you right there.
I'm colorblind. Thanks for that. Like red, green specifically. So yeah. Did you forget that I was colorblind? So you put it in green just to like.
Because I love you, man. I wasn't thinking about that. Help. I had forgotten about that.
Okay. You just want me to do the quip, not the whole introduction.
You know the beginning part.
Right.
Why are you scratching your head, man?
See, that's exactly what I'm talking about.
This is going to be one of the most fun episodes to talk to ever. We just got to get through this intro. We are recording, right?
I just laughed enough. I laughed so much that I got a little dizzy there. That can't be good for concentration. Okay.
Let her rip.
All right. Yeah. Welcome. All right. Welcome. I want to welcome everyone, listeners, gamers, non-gamers, PvEers, PvPers, and even NPCs, because we don't discriminate here at the New Wave Gaming Podcast. Hell yeah. Super stoked to be back. I think this is our 9th episode. We're getting close to the big 1-0. I'm pretty excited about that. We've been really enjoying this. Have you been enjoying it, Chuck T? I have, really. And like I had the same thought. Like 10 would be, like a milestone. I think, it's
100%.
Yeah,
it's a milestone, no doubt. We're really stoked to be here for this episode. We want to thank all the returning listeners for coming back for another round of action, and we want to thank any new listeners that are tuning in for the first time. I'm Ovox.
And I'm ChukTomahawk.
And this is, like Chuck T just mentioned a moment ago, the New Wave Gaming Podcast, where, I'm not going to lie, we've been ping-ponging around episodes here talking about a whole bunch of different stuff, but really what we try to nail down with this podcast is kind of talking about gaming and how it's evolved over the years. I mean, that's really what it boils down to. That's like the main vertical of our podcast. And that's coming from the perspective of, two gents here that are a little bit different age, but we've kind of covered the whole range of gaming and feel like we got something to offer here in terms of, what would you say? Just nostalgic experience, firsthand experience on seeing how all this stuff has evolved. And that's what we're going to continue talking about today.
We're going to take you from Pong to the cloud is what I'm thinking, baby. Like,
oh, really?
All the way to the cloud. That's where it's going next, I think.
Pong to the cloud. Yeah. And on this 9th episode, I think the idea kind of sparked in our last episode where we talked about the Atari VCS, aka 2600. And we were kind of talking about how the whole birth of console gaming had a huge, was a huge factor in how coin-op arcade games kind of started to dissipate as, the 90s came along. And that's really what we're going to talk about today is arcade games, arcade gaming, and just that amazing experience that some of us, not all of us, but some of us got to have. Like just going into the arcade and dumping, I don't know, tens of $20, $30 in quarters into a machine, in what was at the time just still a real new thing for a lot of us young kids back then.
Yeah.
Kind of went on a rant there, but that's really it, right? That's what we want to talk about in this episode.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, as it tied in sort of there with the Atari 2600, like one of the selling points was bringing Space Invaders and like some of the initial successes from the arcade to the house. And, maybe in some ways that was the beginning of the end of its heyday, when there were other options. But, one thing that always stood out to me is the graphics were just always good. Even though I think we're looking at CRT TVs, like there was, there was just something about that. Even it was just really rare for a home game to be as good as what you could see at the arcade.
And that was really the front line, right? That was kind of the front line of the battle between the beginning of console versus coin-op at that, back then, because you're right. The arcade games had way better graphics. They had way better sound. And at the time, the console it just didn't have the tech. It wasn't there for that.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was that was kind of the battle line there, we'll say.
Yeah.
So before we jump into it, again, thank everyone for tuning in. And if you'd like to check us out, off the podcast, you can find us on Facebook. We're at facebook.com/New Wave Gaming Podcast. That's one long word. Facebook.com/New Wave Gaming Podcast. You can always shoot us an email as well at ovoxandchuk@gmail.com. That's ovoxandchuk@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. Shoot us your thoughts, ideas, maybe, episode ideas, anything like that. Something you'd like to hear us maybe chat about. We'll definitely check it out and maybe throw up an episode about it. Or if you give us a shout out, we'll read it here on the podcast. Anything else, Chuck, about our social media or anything like that? Do you want to hear from anyone about anything? Do you have any questions out there?
Yeah, I'd love to just know what like show ideals, especially like you mentioned there. Things that people would love to see us maybe investigate, sort of in the style that we've done other things, and kind of tie that.
Bring our comedic touch to it.
Yeah, yeah. Because I don't know that folks realize it. There's a good bit to it. We're blessed these days with search engines and whatnot, but kind of wading through everything, to the good stuff takes a minute. So.
And you found some good stuff about today's topic. I was like, where does Chuck find these angles to talk about things on the deep dark web? What angles of the gaming web? Yeah. So, ultimately, what the episode came from was just Chuck and I reminiscing on our experiences way back in. Well, for me, it was the '90s, really. Is when I got to experience arcades and the joy of going to play these coin-op games. Basically, I'm sure you've all seen them before, even though they're definitely disappearing these days. But there's just these massive boxes that you would walk up and stand in front of with a screen and a couple of joysticks and maybe 2 to 6 buttons, depending on what game. Really, that's kind of the general physical appearance of one of these things. And for me, experiencing that was in the 90s. Chuck, probably 80s and 90s as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I would have been right at its birth. I consider 81, 82, something in there. So I'd have been around 10 years old, perfect audience for it, tall enough to see.
Man, you were right there in the heyday.
Yeah. Yeah.
You were there,
Loving
I think, fun fact, based off what we found on the interwebs, but I think it was in 81 when in the US in the fiscal year of 81, people spent $8 billion on arcade games.
Yeah.
I think that's it. I don't remember. I think it was in some of the research you passed over to me that at the time that was more than the budgets for 5 or 6 of the largest major cities in the United States.
Yeah, that's the way they framed that, sort of it was almost like there was a local television news type thing covering like the popularity of video games, and that's kind of crazy, isn't it?
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah. Yeah, and putting a quarter in there, kind of
like does change the stakes. Like you know, we were talking about that just a little bit earlier today. Like I guess I thought of it in that frame when I was thinking like how great it is to have it at home. You know, you've got unlimited quarters essentially, but I never thought about how it's a little more serious. Like, you know, I mean, you put your hard-earned money in there, and it's like this is your chance. Like, you know,
oh man, it's like it's in fact so serious that a lot of local and don't hold my feet to the fire on this one, but a lot of governments, I was going to say local and federal, but I don't know if federal. But anyways, I know that a lot of governments, we'll just say local ones, had a real issue with that because they were saying, hey, is this gambling? You know, are these games of chance or games of skill?
Oh, yeah.
And we'll dive into that. We'll jump into that here in a little bit because that was a huge thing. So we're going to talk about some historical stuff here as we usually do in our podcast, but really it's mostly just to relive and share with everyone, and hopefully some listeners will be able to reminisce with us and be like, God, I remember that. That was so much fun. And then you know what? If there's any younger listeners that have never experienced this arcade, God, I hate saying experience twice, but if you haven't experienced this arcade experience, I hate saying
the
that.
Vibe, you know, just
the vibe,
feeling,
you know, that feeling, you can still do it. I mean, it's not like it is back in the 80s, man, or in the 90s, but you can still have this experience. There still are arcades out there, and you gotta do it.
Yeah.
So, man, where to begin? Should we just do a little bit of or was I getting at something? I'm so excited. I don't know if I was like getting at something.
If we could just lay down that little bit of history of how we got to this place of the, you know, a coin op machine or something, you know, a game that I'm playing for entertainment that I, you know, put some money down. I found that part pretty interesting. I saw something like maybe like strength testing machines or something with the carnival.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, it really depends on how far we want to go back. Because I saw stuff saying like late 19th century. You know, that's like in the 1800s. And I think there was like skee ball and carnival games. And you had mentioned like strongman type stuff. That's a carnival game if ever I ever heard one right there.
Yeah, like you punch this thing and there's like when you hit a thing that causes this thing to go up high enough, and if it goes up to the very top, it hits this bell where, you know, you get this real satisfying ding, you know, kind of thing. And you know, I think that was kind of like in how this kind of ties back in with Nolan Bush now, like the guy from Atari, where you know, I think he developed this thing called computer space, was sort of a prototyped plastic.
Absolutely. Now, that's way down the road. I don't know if we want to jump ahead that far yet, but
yeah, you know, I guess I just see that point, like where, you know, these things got more and more like almost like the games you would see at Dave and Buster's, you know, at this point in time, like skee ball, like you said, you know, things that you could put a coin in and you know, do different things, and that kind of existed. And I think he saw, like, maybe he had Pong or something, and he was kind of like, you know, hey, there's something here. Like I can.
Yeah, we're gonna get to that. We're gonna get to that.
Yeah.
But so we're in the 1800s. Everyone's wearing like really, you know, classy. Like they're wearing those hats and they got the nice suits. Everyone's looking real nice back in the late 1800s. It's still the end of the Wild West days, and you could go to find these carnival games and skee ball, and then that kind of lasted up to the 1940s, it looks like. But before that, right around there at the 1930s, coming out of the Depression, we see pinball come up and arise. Mm-hmm. Pinball from the 1930s to the 1960s was kind of like the heyday there. I mean, there's obviously still a lot of pinball machines. In fact, I wouldn't even go to say that it ended in the 1960s, certainly not. But pinball was a huge one. Mm-hmm. And there's a whole bunch of controversy around pinball too, regarding the games of skill versus games of chance and gambling and how to regulate that. It wasn't until, and this is just another like fun factoid, it wasn't until they were able to invent those electrical paddles that the creators of the pinball machine could in fact, now I remember, it was classified as a game of chance, and it fell under the gambling type regulation set. And it wasn't until they invented those paddles that the people that made the pinball machine were able to go back and say, hey, we're going to reclassify this thing because now there's actually some skill involved here, and it's not just wherever the ball may go. So they reclassify that bad boy, and it ceased to be a game of chance, became a game of skill, and therefore was able to be much more widely distributed. And man, pinball machines were taking over the country, dude. At least that's kind of like the understanding I got from our research. It makes perfect sense.
It does, yeah. I saw something too that links like some of that technology came out of World War II. I forget exactly what it was used for, but like the something that developed the development of pinball machines, like the points or something like that.
Man, it makes sense.
Yeah.
I mean, it makes sense because a lot of tech came out of that. That war. A lot of stuff came from that.
It's almost like
a lot of advancements.
Something in history that, like I think maybe even this particular article pointed out that it repeats itself. Like a lot of things come out of bad things like that. Like technology can kind of get a boost, in unexpected ways. So yeah, I think that's really cool.
And I wouldn't be surprised if we got real granular about this and got real depthful, that we would find that a lot of the actual electromechanical and digital, all this programming and video game tech, I'm sure a lot of its roots come from the technology that was produced in World War II, or that came from that historical event. So we got pinball. And then, and after that, 1940s to 1970s comes electromechanical games, which aren't arcade games yet, but that's kind of like before. Electromechanical, gosh, I'm trying to find a good example here. But I saw things, like I saw that Sega, which I didn't know that Sega's been around since 1960.
I didn't either. No.
Sega had some electromechanical games back in the 60s. One of them was called Periscope. So, here, let me read this real quick. I'm using a cheat code from Google, meaning we're just using Google to find quick answers. It says Periscope is an electromechanical arcade shooting submarine simulator, initially called Torpedo Launcher. It was designed by Nakamura Manufacturing Company, which became Namco in 1977. We've all heard that name. And released in Japan in 1965. So this is even before the first arcade games, which came out in 72. 71, 72. It says, hold on. It says here, and released in Japan in 1965 as the first arcade game. But it says it's an electromechanical game. So, matter of interpretation and perspective, but I think we can... looking at the picture, it doesn't seem like a video game to me. It seems more like a mechanical one. And then it says, electromechanical games are types of arcade games. That's right. It's a type of arcade game. That's why.
Okay.
Also referred to as EM games. And they operate on a combination of some electronic circuitry and mechanical actions from the player to move items contained within the game's cabinet. Some of these were... early light gun games using light-sensitive sensors on targets to register hits, and so on and so forth. So, just almost video game, but still like electronical moving parts and stuff to simulate. But anyways,
I feel like once electricity is involved in something, like I feel like at this point we're pretty far from Ben Franklin, so like we don't appreciate like just how incredible electricity is. But like it just have you ever been electrocuted?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
it sucks. Yeah, it really sucks. When it's done and you're lucky enough to like pull your body away from whatever it is that's waking you up. Yeah. When it's done, it's like, I never want that to happen again to me ever in my life.
No, sir.
I never want that to happen again.
Yeah, I feel like any game that involves electricity, like from that point on, is a higher stake. Even though it's not like perceived that I could be shocked by the game or anything, but you're playing with fire right there. You're playing with lightning, son. I mean,
oh, you mean for the average person in the 1960s walking up to that for the first time?
Yeah, certainly from that perspective, and just I kind of wanted to bring up the fact that I have been electrocuted as well. On at least 2 occasions I can think of. One of which, I changed my first light bulb, when I was a kid. I went and got a chair from the kitchen table, and I took it into the bathroom, and I knew where the light bulbs were. This is probably when I was, I would say, 8, 9 years old, and I climbed up on that chair, and there were 2 light bulbs, and one of them was kind of facing me, and I took the old one out and I screwed that in there, and then I kind of came in the other room to let my dad know it, and I said, hey, I've changed my first light bulb, and he was like, yeah, well, congratulations, or whatever. So I go back in the bathroom, and I kind of I'm reaching to kind of find the hole for the second one, and I just stick my finger in there, to
right in there.
Yeah, right in there. And I jumped. The back, I was facing the back of the chair, and I jumped the back of the chair without turning it over.
Man.
Running back out.
Yeah.
yeah. There's my dad having beers and shit. It's the greatest day of his life.
He's like, you're all right.
Yeah. He's like, did you get
You'll
shot?
be all right.
Oh yeah.
Oh, that's bad.
Yeah. Electricity, no joke.
Yeah, no joke. I don't want to tell you about how I got shocked because you'll just totally be like, why in the hell did you do that?
No, I need it. Would you pee on an electric fence?
Oh, now that you, dude. Yeah. Oh no, all right, I don't want to go down more rabbit holes. We're talking about arcade games here.
Yeah.
But I just had some flashbacks of living in Southern Oregon.
All involve electricity.
There's a lot of ranches up there with electric fences.
Yep.
So yeah, we've got electromechanical games kind of going up to the 1970s, and these are all, again, just like the pinball machines. These are all skee ball, carnival games, pinball, electromechanical games. There are still units or I don't want to say consoles because that'll get confused with game consoles, but there's still units out there. There's still places you can go to play these things.
Yeah.
When it comes to skee ball and those older incarnations of arcade games, it's going to get a little bit more difficult. I think there's a place in New Hampshire. It's the biggest arcade in the world. I don't remember what the name of the town is in New Hampshire, but I think it's called Fun Spot.
I saw that.
And you can, you can go there, and they have a lot of these older they have a lot of pinball, so there's places you can go, and that's what we were getting at. If you have never experienced going to an arcade before, you got to do it. But anyways, So we get all that, and then it's really in the 1970s. I wasn't alive yet. Chuck T, I think you were
just born.
Were you? You were
71. Yep.
You're fresh.
Yep.
Yep. Is really in the 1970s when our friend, the legend of Atari, Nolan Bushnell. He's not actually our friend. I just said that. I don't know how it happened. I don't know. I think what they had some tech, and they said, we need to take this technology and this, like you were describing, Chuck, this successful arcade dynamic, I guess, this interface between the public and this game, where they can walk up to it and interact with the game. They wanted to use their tech in some sort of a platform like that. And that's kind of where I think they had a couple of iterations. They tried 2 different coin-op games that didn't actually end up working before they released Pong in 1972, which became the first successful arcade proper, video game.
Yeah.
Is that kind of, I think
I saw
that's kind of what
maybe one of those was like a single player Pong, maybe, and it didn't sell. I saw something like that, and then I
think one of them was called Computer Space.
Yeah.
The Atari Computer Space, and they sold, they made 1,000 units and weren't able to sell them all, and that was in 1971. In fact, let me pull it up right here.
It looks pretty futuristic, doesn't it? It's got that mid-century modern vibe kind of thing going on there.
Dude, it looks super like Lost in Spacey, super Star Trek, the original series. You know, like it just might be sitting there next to, you know, Uhura's comms, or like just sitting there next to Spock or something. It could totally be there. Rest in peace, Uhura. We're going to miss you. But yeah, let me read this real quick, using a quick cheat code. It says, arcade video games. It says, after 2 attempts to package mainframe computers running video games into a coin-operated arcade cabinet in 1971, which were Galaxy Game and Computer Space, Atari released Pong in 1972, the first successful arcade video game. The number of arcade game makers greatly increased over the next several years, including several of the companies that had been making EM games, which were those electromechanical ones we were talking about, such as Midway, Bally, Williams, Sega, and Taito. And so the Pong was the first successful arcade video game in a cabinet. Did you ever play that thing?
I don't remember it at a cabinet, but I feel like it has to be somewhere. And if it was probably more like not so much at an arcade as it was like a bar or something. Or, yeah, that would, you know, it must have been some random place. I did play it at home. You know, I think last episode I mentioned I had a friend that, you know, had one of those early sets that only played Pong. But
yeah. So it looks like when they released this Pong thing and they nailed it, I don't remember the guy's name. Was it Al Acorn?
That sounds right.
It might be. It's either him or it's another dude. And I apologize if I'm not on the spot here with this. But I think Nolan Bushnell said, "Hey, we need to we need to make this game," and he goes and creates Pong. And at the time, he says, "Look, this is what the product looks like." He had like a final draft of the game, if you will, and it was just the 2 paddles going up and down and the ball going across the screen. It was like a tennis type game, and I guess the programmer was like, "What do we do from here?" And Nolan Bushnell was like, "Stop, leave it right there. It's perfect. 2 paddles." And I think, no, it wasn't the first co-op game. Was it the first co-op game? I think the first co-op game was. Shoot.
It's like this thing where you come in these spaceships and you take something away, sort of. Like I remember the footage about that kind of being like, you know.
I think it was Space Invaders that was the first co-op, or Asteroids. I don't remember which one it was.
It's a space game, and the ships look a lot like the ships from Galaga, like the actual ship that's called the Galaga that picks you up and, you know, you can shoot it down to get, you know, the double spaceship at the bottom. The ships kind of looked like that, and they were grabbing something from the middle. I think is the way I remember kind of when I saw that gameplay. But they even did some market research, I think, that showed that you know, people enjoyed cooperating.
Yeah, but what game was that? Was it Space Invaders or was it Asteroids?
It's not either one of those. It's got space in the name, but it's not. It's like,
it was. I remember it was the game that was created by, gosh, my dad worked for him, man. Cinematronics.
Yeah.
And it was called, oh gosh, I don't remember, but that was the first co-op game.
Yeah.
And they did really well, even though, you know, Cinematronics ended up, you know, they didn't last forever. They ended up closing shop, or got bought out by someone else. But yeah, gosh, I'm trying to remember what the name of that game was. Anyways, it'll come to me. Yeah. It'll come to me. So, yeah. I think, what do you remember? What the 3 games? There were 3 games that really blasted off the arcade video game market into its maximum. And I think the first one was, in fact, Space Invaders, which was released in 1978, if I'm not mistaken. Mm-hmm. That was kind of like their first game that was like really successful, and that everyone was like, "Man, this arcade thing is, you know, it's a good market to get into." And then they had Asteroids, which is the second game that really launched them. And then there was a third game that really just changed the whole scene for arcades, and it really brought in all types of people, young, older, professionals, moms, dads, everyone, and that was Pac Man, of course.
Yeah, you're dead on. Yeah, yeah. I think those are kind of the three, pillars of the beginnings of the success of the arcade, and they got better at each one. Like I feel like it's a close race for me between Asteroids and Space Invaders. I think Space Invaders is a little more complex. Asteroids also ported really well to home. Like the home version of Asteroids is almost identical to the arcade, in my opinion.
Yeah. Oh, I remember now. It was Space Invaders was the first game to bring in a high score dynamic where you could actually track your score, and then it was what Asteroid brought to the game was like they advanced on keeping score, and I think it was a 2-player game or something like that. I don't remember, but there was something that each one of those brought to the table that really changed everything. Do you remember anything about that?
I do remember the significance of the score. Like that's something I think about, as kind of like your video game clout, without the internet to kind of share that with. But as far as the other parts of that, I don't,
yeah.
I think of, I don't know that I put Asteroids in that list for myself. I think of Space Invaders, Pac Man, and then I think we should, if I was going to pick that, I would pick something from the later days, like, maybe even that Dance Dance Revolution or something that
oh man, that thing was,
yeah.
Oh, geez. That was later on. And we're going to come to that time frame when those were everywhere and people were
and I think another
competing.
turn was like at some point Sega started doing things like Super Hang On and games that were more of an immersive experience, like where you actually sat down in a car or you sat on top of a motorcycle, and they really went that direction for a little bit. I feel like that there's as we go through history or whatever, I think those are like right up there with those milestones. I think of the early games even.
Yep. So as technology moved from transistor logic integrated circuits to microprocessors, which we saw with those MOS chips.
Yeah.
Right. We've talked about the MOS chips in our Intellivision episode, in our Atari episode. A new wave of arcade video games arose, starting with Taito's Space Invaders in 1978 and leading to a golden age of arcade games that included Pac Man by Namco in 1980, Missile Command by Atari in 1980, Donkey Kong by Nintendo in 1981. The golden age waned in 1983 due to an excess number of arcade games, the growing draw of home video game consoles and computers, and a moral panic on the impact of arcade video games on the youth. The arcade industry was also partially impacted by the video game crash of 1983. And again, I'm pulling from online, from the wiki on arcade video games. So there was the 1983 crash. We've talked about that before. The growing draw of home video game consoles and computers. There was certainly that battlefront, because they were just really the only thing that was holding the consoles back against the arcades were those graphics.
Yeah, and I wonder what caused that exactly. Like, is it the extra room in the cabinet, or not having to keep the price down, for each individual unit? I wonder how that.
You mentioned a huge thing, and this starts to become more prominent in the 90s. We'll see it more, but what starts to occur is that the video game console tech gets better, they really dump. I think they dump a lot of creativeness into that and effort, because they realize that, like, hey, if we can give something to a kid where he doesn't have to be, or a family, a mom and a dad, where their kid isn't dumping quarters into this thing, and they can get it once, and then we can just, like we talked about in the Atari episode, we can just create cartridges. So they keep coming back and buying those. I think there was a lot of vision there. And then on the other side of that, the arcade games, they were also getting better, and there was a lot of controversy around on whether they were a bad influence for kids or not. And I think it got to a point where I'm trying to find the best way to describe this, but basically it costs a lot for them to buy one of the machines, and then for the machine to pay itself off, they needed to have a certain amount of kids or people ultimately dumping coins into that machine for it to pay itself off, and then it can turn a profit. So it got to a point where the technology was moving so fast and the games were just coming out so quickly and getting so good and so and better and better and better. We know how technology advances now and how fast it gets better. I think that these the people that were purchasing these cabinets, these units or arcade games, it got to a point where the market was so saturated that they just weren't able to pay them off and then turn a profit.
Oh, I see.
You see what I'm saying? So like, you know, because like you just mentioned, like, boom, I got an Atari now at my home. I just got a 2600.
Yeah.
You know, where maybe I would have gone to the arcade 4 times a week, I'm only going to go there twice now with my friends on the weekend. Yeah. So, you know, so that 50 quarters or 60 quarters or 70 quarters that I may have dumped in over the week, now it's just 20 quarters. And I think that's slowly, you know, especially in places where they're really depending on these machines back in the 80s, 90s. Yeah, I can see how the table started to turn.
Yeah, ultimately it's a better investment because, you know, I think if all of us had hung on to every one of those cartridges, that, you know, if you saved those quarters that you were going to put in the arcade and bought that cartridge and then kept it into 2022, you know, it would be worth, you know, hundreds of dollars at this point.
But like, think about this though too, like as a little kid, like, you get the cartridge. Are you not going to get just as bored with that cartridge as fast as you got just as bored with the cabinet machine?
Absolutely.
You know, except that cartridge isn't 1 quarter back then or these days.
Yeah. Yeah, that's something to think about. Did you see some of the wild examples of sort of once they were into this glutton type period, like where these games started showing up?
I saw some funny games, man. There was one I saw called Cadillacs and Dinosaurs.
What was that?
And it's just this like, dude, it's just like this ripped dude. He's just super ripped, just side scroller, just walking forward, kind of like, remember that Ninja Turtles game? Oh, yeah. In fact, there was recently, they re-released a Ninja Turtles game.
Yeah.
Where it's kind of like that, a side scroller. And the guy's ripped, dude, and there's just these frickin' dinosaurs just jumping out all over the screen, and you just gotta like punch them out and stuff. You're just beating dinosaur ass at the game, dude. You know, and it was precisely, I think it was these kinds of beat 'em up games that brought back the arcade. It re-injected life into the arcade industry right around there in the mid '90s when it was starting to wane a little bit. Because there were so many games hitting the market that were all kind of the same.
Yeah, what did you see too? Like where they like they even like had them at funeral homes and grocery stores and you know, just they were everywhere at some point. And you know, I think that like I thought about the funeral home, like what on earth?
I know, man. Whose idea was that?
I don't know. But
should we put in Mr. Pac Man or Mrs. Pac Man?
It's like, man, this line's pretty long. I think I'm going to knock out a couple rounds of Pac Man.
Oh, I didn't know him that well. I'm sorry. That's bad.
Like earlier I was thinking when you were talking about that, you know, the value of that quarter is such like have you ever walked away from a machine that you had a man left on? Like I feel like I remember times like my mom probably showed up at the arcade and it was time to go, and like, you know, I think she probably was even pulling on the back of my jacket or something, and I'm like, no, yeah, I've got one more man.
Can't you see the heart on the left of the screen?
Yeah. Like you don't leave a pinball machine with a ball, like, and you don't leave.
I can just see you, man. Like, Mom, you don't understand.
I'm upstairs. I put a quarter in there.
Yeah. All right. Reading on.
Yeah.
So, Yeah, the arcade crash. There was a video game crash in 1983, right? And we've talked about this in many episodes. Basically, there was just too much out there, not enough people playing them, oversaturated, crash. Okay, we got it. The arcade market kind of came around and recovered by 1986 with the help of software conversion kits, the arrival of popular beat-em-up games such as Kung Fu Master and Renegade. I've heard a lot of people talk about that Renegade game. And in advanced motion simulator games such as Sega's Taiken games, including Hang On, Space Harrier, and Outrun. Those, my friend, are the games you were talking about. Where they have kind of like hydraulic movement, you know? And I think the mastermind behind all that under Sega's umbrella was a guy named Yu Suzuki.
Oh, yeah.
So Yu Suzuki, you know, he works with Sega. He's a game designer, producer, programmer, and engineer, and he headed Sega's AM2 division. And he's, you know, all about the motion simulator arcade cabinet games, such as, you know, the games I just read, Outrun, Afterburner, Space Harrier, Hang On. And he also did a lot of work in pioneering polygonal 3D games, such as Virtua Racing and Virtua Fighter. All of those games right there, man, when I read their names, they just, like, so many flashbacks of my childhood.
Well, they were the ones that cost 50 cents. You know, that was the real, I mean, we just talked about what it was like to put a quarter on the line. I mean, it was 50 cents. And it could end fast. Like, you wrecked that motorcycle in a heartbeat.
Dude, oh, man, 50 cents for Hang On, Outrun, and Afterburner. If you wanted to get into those friggin' 3D polygon sprite, you know, whatever the hell, that was 75 cents to $1.
Yeah.
You were, I mean...
Well...
You know, that's when you live north of the tracks or whatever.
You know, I'm going to be honest with you. I have to say, little ChukTomahawk, I always kind of shied away from the Super Hang-On because I was a pretty good-sized little kid. And, like, you know, I always had this fear that it wasn't built for me. Like you know, it didn't advertise a weight limit, but you know there is one. Like...
You didn't want to get on the little crotch rocket
and rip it off there or something, you know, just jacked up like that. Kids be talking about that from now on. No, sir. No, yeah. I like the car one. You know, that was more my gig. Like I remember the steering wheel kind of fought you back, like when you would be wrecking.
Oh yeah.
You know, the steering wheel was...
It'd break your pinky if you didn't you know, if you hit the side of the road and didn't...
You had to go thumbs up on the thing. You didn't put your thumbs under, or you were going to die. Like pretty much. So you only did that once.
Your thumbs are all jacked up. Mom, can you carry my tickets?
Totally worth it.
I'm not trying to drop them.
Yeah,
we got to talk about the tickets too, man. That was a huge part of, at least for me, being a little kid going to the arcade. The tickets and ticket swaps and exchanges for prizes and rewards. We got to touch on that too. But let me finish off this quick paragraph.
They were finessing us on that. We got...
It was the growth of home video game systems such as the Nintendo Entertainment System that led to another brief arcade decline towards the end of the 1980s. I think the Nintendo was released in 83 or 84, if I remember the original NES. Yeah. And then fighting games like Street Fighter II in 1991 and Mortal Kombat in 1992 also helped to revive the industry in the early 1990s for, you know, arcade games, leading to a renaissance, precisely, of the arcade industry. 3D graphics were popularized in arcades during the early 1990s with games such as Sega's Virtua Racing and Virtua Fighter, which we mentioned earlier, and so on and so forth. You know, but the capabilities of home consoles continued to improve. Computers, and you know, they got better and better at mimicking arcade video games during this time, and they started to draw more crowds, you know, than the arcades. Like more people were buying consoles at that point, it seemed like. And I think it was towards the late 90s where the balance tipped in terms of if we look at the gaming industry and we split it into two, arcade games, console games, there was a balance there, and the arcade games were always superior, making more money. I mean, we mentioned earlier that in 1981 it was an $8 billion industry. You know, I think they were. There were some other interesting like numerical factoids there that really like open up your eyes. I think one of them was that, and don't quote me on this, but in one of those years, 80, 81, 82, something like that, or maybe it was 81 and 82, but like kids had dumped like what was the equivalent of 75,000 years of time into arcade games in 2 years. Did you see that? Yeah. Like I saw that and I was like, I don't know, like how does that work? Like I kind of wanted to like break that down, but let's just take it at face value and say, you know, just for shits and giggles and just like suspect that that's accurate. Wow.
Yeah.
So there was a tipping point right around there in the late 90s where consoles took the lead in terms of just, you know, how much money they were making. They were getting the larger share, consoles.
Yeah. And honestly, I feel like my own life sort of mirrored that just, you know, by my personal timing as I, you know, in the 90s, I was graduating high school and, you know, going on to college. And there was a brief time period there, you know, maybe I didn't do video games as much. You know, maybe right when I was getting out of high school, I think there was a time period there I was too cool for anything, you know.
Oh, you're a cool dude, Chuck T. You know,
we would just ride like instead of going to the arcade, once we had our own set of wheels, we just drove around town constantly, like in a circle, essentially, like trying to be seen,
oh, yeah.
cruising town. Yeah,
I used to do that too.
Yeah.
You just pick up your friends, be like, "What's up? You want us to drive around?"
Yeah.
And down here we would call it in Spanish dar la vuelta. Which is to do the loop.
Yeah.
Dar la vuelta is like to do the loop. Vamos a dar la vuelta? Let's go do the loop. Just waste some gas and nothing, looking at the sidewalk.
Well, there were two large like supermarket parking lots on either end of town, and you know, so eventually you would park there, and you know, different groups of friends would gather, and it was
park there.
It was what you did. I mean, it was the deal, and like it was like we were too cool to be inside at the arcade there. It had moved to a new location and had like a big restaurant beside it, and you know, that was part of the same ownership, but yeah, I guess I was too cool for video games. But once we got to college, you know, at the dorm room, you got tons of time to, you know, that has to be killed, and I think it came back into favor at that point.
Yeah, it's up until about 1996, arcade video games had remained the largest sector of the global video game industry before arcades declined in the late 1990s, with the console market surpassing arcade video games for the first time around 1997, 1998. Arcade video games declined in the Western world during the 2000s, with most arcades serving highly specialized experiences that cannot be replicated in the home, including lines of pinball and other arcade games, coupled with other entertainment options such as restaurants or bars. I mean, they had to do these extras as like a way to survive. That's how fast the arcade industry was dying. Like if we don't create extremely specialized experiences that these kids cannot experience on their home consoles, we're going to completely lose this thing.
Yeah.
So like they're like, you know what? Let's make it pure pinball and add in a bar and a restaurant. Or you know what? Let's primarily focus on top-notch barber cuts and haircuts and like a salon type thing, and we'll throw a couple of machines in the corner just for fun. You know, it's not about arcades anymore, really, except for in these very unique places where they still have arcades, like in New Hampshire.
Yeah, where they're almost creating a retro 80s retro
experience.
Yeah.
Which is dope. I'm all about that. Yeah. So it says here, arcade video games had declined in the decline was sort of highly specialized experience that cannot be replicated in home, including lines of pinball. Yep. Among newer arcade video games include Dance Dance Revolution that require specialized equipment, as well as games incorporating motion simulation or virtual reality. Arcade games had remained popular in Asian regions until around the late 2010s, as popularity began to wane. When once there were about 26,000 arcades in Japan around 1986, there were only about 4,000 arcades in 2019. Wow. 22,000 arcades less. The COVID-19 pandemic, of course, in 2020 and 2021 also drastically hit the arcade industry.
Yeah, it's
but,
a bad
Japan,
fit for that, having to touch that joystick.
Oh, yeah.
It's like game over, literally.
Yeah. So that's kind of the arcade history right there, There's lots of different types of arcade games, because if we look at arcade games as an umbrella term, we've got, carnival games, electromechanical games, merchandiser games, pachinko, photo booths, pinball machines, slot machines, sports games, redemption games. But when we talk about arcade video games, we're talking about 1971 to about the end of the 90s. Mm-hmm. That's it. And what a time. What a time. I don't think I could find the words to describe the feelings of going to these places where they had arcade video games. Each one of them created its own combination of feelings. Like, for example, something I used to love was going to see Grandma. I'd go to see Grandma. This is Grandma on Mother's side. Same with Grandma on Pop's side. Similar experiences, but something that stands out is I'd go visit her, and she lives in like small town Southern Oregon, and there's this ice cream joint there, Shy's Cafe. It's just like, now and living in Mexico and stuff, I go back there and I see this place, and it's still there, man. I can't believe it's still like, when so many other places in this little town have closed or changed or, whatever. This place is still there, and like in the back part of that cafe and the ice cream shop where all the young kids go and the teens of the town, after floating the river all day, they want to go to Shy's Cafe and get a cold, vanilla ice cream and play those video games in the back room.
Heck yeah.
And that was something that I remember it so well. And there'd always be a couple of cute girls there, hanging out with their families, and you just stand there playing the Pac Man. I think they had I don't remember what they had, but I remember the video games at other places, but I don't remember the games at that cafe, but I remember it well. Going there and playing those arcade games.
Yeah. I think it's like it's almost something as a kid that is like a little world that you have, that's yours when you step into those machines. Like, it's almost, it kind of makes you forget everything else for just, a few minutes. Like, is I think why that those experiences got, kind of cemented in our memories like that.
Do you have any arcade games that you remember just dumping hours into and tons of coins? Because I can name 3 of them right now for me.
I think for me, I can't necessarily, I remember having pretty much a roll of quarters, and I would distribute it amongst a number of games. So no one game stands out, exactly, other than like a little bit later in the progression there, late 80s, early 90s, I think, when Gauntlet came out. And you had this situation like where you would be playing with 4 different people, and you would die and they would be continuing, and you could put a quarter in to continue. And
yeah,
boy, howdy, did that thing eat quarters. Like, cause I mean,
yeah. And you can't just like let your other teammates continue the fight without you. If you lose, you got to go find another quarter.
Yeah. And I mean, it's
like your buddy looks at you when he's still fighting the enemy, like, you better fucking go find another quarter, motherfucker.
Well, and there's a countdown.
We're fighting
like,
this guy without
like 25 seconds or something. Like,
oh, that's right. I forgot about that.
It's prompting you, like, like there's a bomb is going to go.
7, 6.
Yeah, especially on those Mortal Kombat games, man. The big letters, the big numbers would come up on the screen.
Yeah, and so
5,
you're like fishing
4,
through your pockets. Oh shit. Mom. Yeah. It's also a legendary time to hit up your buddy that's playing. Like, it's like, hey, you got another quarter? I don't have change. It's your older brother up there, but yeah, that thing 8 quarters for sure, and it was genius for them because 4 people were playing. I mean, it took up a good bit of space, but they had the potential to bring in more money, because I think that's one of the things that was kind of like, even when we go to the arcades today, I would say even that place, that we were talking about, the what was it, New Hampshire, where it was at?
Yeah, I think it's called Fun Spot.
They probably they probably use quarters still to this day. Like it's
man.
It's a limiting factor of sorts, isn't it? Like
it is, because it takes out it kind of like takes out the leisure part of video game playing. Like when we're playing Ark, like I can just kind of just plop myself down there, and there's a element of anxiety of challenge that's removed by me knowing that I can just hit start again.
Yeah.
Like I'm good. I'm good. Nothing's going to be taken away from me. I can complete this challenge later if I want to. But if I have 1 quarter or 10 quarters, I can't just come back and complete this challenge when I want to. I have to give it all with every quarter so that I can maximize this amount of time in this place, because either I'm gonna get the most out of my time there and get to play as many games possible and stretch it out and maybe win a lot of tickets, because we haven't touched on that yet, how the larger arcades would have a ticket system. But anyways, what I really wanted to avoid was Mom showing up, me running out of quarters way before Mom would show up to pick me up.
Amen, brother. Amen.
Can you speak to that?
Well, I think one of the things that says the most about that is, like, if you go back and watch this retro footage of these arcades, is the stance that someone is standing when they're at these games. Like, because you see that guy that's not worried, the guy that has plenty of quarters.
Oh, you mean the actual, like, the way a person physically stands before the cabinet?
Language, yeah. Because you see the guy that's like, like he's played Pac Man so much, like those first levels, like he's not even having to try. Like he might even be, having a candy bar or a drink, or hugging on his girlfriend while he
like, check this out, baby.
But see that, and then like it's like panning around the room. You see this one guy that's like squared up on it, and he's gotten a little bit lower, and he's on the buttons. It's like, boss fight.
Like when you put your boss fight. That's so true. Yeah. That used to happen to me when I'd play Metal Slug.
Yeah.
Awesome arcade game.
Yeah, like if the crowd gets in on you, got to back them off a little bit. Like you're like, all right, kids, get back.
Hey, man, elbow room. Yeah. This is the last level. Elbow room.
Defender had like 7 buttons, and you could have that sidler kid that wanted to come and mess with them buttons, like, because you didn't use them all the time. Like part of them were for like when you rescued those little guys and stuff. And yeah, you'd have that random kid that wanted to come up there and tap on them buttons.
I heard that Defender really like changed the scene for a lot of gamers back in the day, because like, younger kids, teenagers, and let's call it young 20s, that they're all playing video games. But Defender came out, and I guess it was kind of like, from what I understand, it was like, oh, well, this game's actually for the older crowd. It's for mature gamers.
It's complex.
It's not for little kids. It's not a 2-button game. It's a 7-button game. A 7-button game? Yeah. You know what I mean? Like,
amen. And it ported super
case?
well to the home. Like the graphics really went well at the home. But yeah, it had this feature to it where there were like, it was a space invasion, and you were trying to protect these citizens, and you had to rescue them. And I can't remember what all those buttons did exactly, and I'm sure I probably didn't know. Like I probably had some idea, and like it was on the machine or something, but I'm sure there were ins and outs that even I didn't know. But yeah, I found myself like really fascinated by people's body language and how just even the people watching and all that kind of goes down, you know, and like older brothers and younger brothers kind of interacting there, you know, it's like, as the older brother, you got to remind your younger brother, like, you know, don't spend all that, you know.
Yeah. Hey, I'm not going to give you any of my quarters. You know, every quarter counts, man. Every quarter counts. And you only get a number of, you know, you can only play the more expensive games a number of times, and it all really falls down. It's like a whole environment of economics in the arcade, man. Like each kid has his own economic environment going on where he has to make really tough choices on how to divide the funds between reward games, which were these games in arcades where you could go in and there's like a whole section of the arcade where there's basically a person there with all these cabinets and rewards and stuff that you can win with tickets that you get from these arcade games. So, for example, this isn't a proper arcade video game, but like if you go to an arcade, they'll probably have these, I guess. What are they called? It's the balls, John, that you roll a ball up the ramp and it launches into the little hole.
Skee ball.
Is it skee ball? Is that it?
Ski. Yeah.
I think so. Anyways, like, so you'll play that, and if you get good shots, a bunch of tickets will come out of the machine, and you pull the tickets out, and you just start collecting those tickets. Mm-hmm. You take the tickets to the counter. How many tickets did you get? And then they'll give you like, you know, a range of prizes that you can take home with you. Mm-hmm. So getting back to it, you'd have to look at all your quarters and be like, okay, I got one roll of quarters here, or I got 20, I got 30, I got 40 quarters, whatever it may be, you know. It really just depends on how, you know, what kind of a mood your parents were in that day or that weekend, depending on how many quarters you get. And you'd have to choose, like, how do I want to play traditional beat 'em up, or do I want to play old school classic game? Do I want to do tickets for rewards, or do I want to just get a couple of rounds in with a really expensive game and get the full immersive experience?
Yeah.
And if we talk about, oh man, and this is where the whole idea for this episode came. If we talk about the classic shopping mall arcade, this usually was a very, very large space where you would walk in and it was just instant visual overload.
Casino atmosphere almost.
Just like,
ching, ching, ching.
What? Especially if you're anywhere from 5 to maybe 17, 5 years old to 17 years old, you're just like sucked right in.
Yeah. 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 You know, especially as a kid, because you probably were still with your parents and you'd had to go through a bunch of school clothes shopping and stuff that you didn't want to do. And now this is like,
dude, you're so right.
This is your time, baby. You know?
Yeah, you're so right, man. Gosh, I miss that so much. Yeah. You could turn back the hands of time.
Yeah, and God bless my parents.
Shopping malls aren't even...
Yeah, and you know, maybe even like that would be the time that my mom would be checking out something she wanted to check out, and she was like, you know, you go in here for a little while or whatever. It was, you know, reasonably safe to leave your kid in there, you know, I felt like, and back in those days, and yeah. Freaking
gosh, what a amazing time. I mean, and you know, you can kids these days can still experience that. I just don't think it would be the same because you know, the places where you can go to have your arcade experience, certainly the mall arcade experience, it's few and far between. Like I don't know how many, because even malls, you know, just the figure of the mall is dying. You know, like the mall in my town up in Oregon, where I used to live. I mean, I really think soon that place is going to get turned into something else. You know,
that's
it's not the mall. Board. It's not the mall that I remember from my, you know, when I was a little kid, going there just super excited because going to the mall meant a couple of things. It meant some new threads, you know, a couple new T-shirts, maybe some shorts, maybe a couple of No Fear shirts, some Bugle Boy shorts. You know what I mean? Remember those old brands back in the day,
absolutely.
Dude? You know, some Get Go shirts or something like
OP
that.
Was the thing.
OP, Ocean Pacific. Yeah. Oh man, you know. So it meant going to JCPenney or something like that, and it meant going to that awesome food court where you could only get yummy,
Cheesesteak.
super unhealthy, just the best food ever, as a little kid. And it meant going to the arcade.
Amen.
And it meant, you sent a clip from the movie Fast Times at Ridgemont High. It's that, dude. It's just like that. It's a place where we used to go as kids or as young teens where, man, it was happening. Yeah. Everything was happening at the mall, man. That's where you wanted to be. And the arcade was a part of that, because when you weren't, kind of just like chasing the cute girls in the mall that were walking around, or going to get food court food, or checking out the skate shop or whatever, we were in the arcade.
Yeah. I think at our mall they did have that section where you could win things, and there were only really a few machines that had the ability to produce the tickets. I want to say it was more like the claw machine, and there was some other, like a wheel type spit thing that you spun, I think, that somehow determined what you got. But dude, I feel like they were finessing us a little bit on that whole thing, because there would be this display case that would get it was right about kid height, and it would
right as you walk in.
Yeah, it would have like, I think I remember maybe even like a Game Boy or something being in there, and like some headset, like Walkman type thing, and the Sony Walkman, that like there was this yellow version that was like the sports one or whatever. I remember seeing it in there. And
you'd see it and be like, this is $150 at the Radio Shack over there.
But behind them, they had this shelf, and it had like some stuffed animals and a bunch of lesser prizes that would, once you rolled it, like you would get this wad of tickets, and you would think like, oh yeah, this is like Walkman for sure. And like you go over there and you hand it to him, and the guy turns around and it's like, you can get anything you want, from the ruler
from that nice plastic ruler right there
over here to the paper clips, the color paper clips.
It's like, sir, that it's 500 tickets. It's 500 tickets.
Yeah, like
and you'll do a double take of the Walkman, or of the whatever, the Game Boy, and it'll say some ridiculous number like
1.5 million.
10,000 tickets, 15,000 tickets. So
yeah. It never went the way you thought. You never saw anybody walk out of there with that Walkman for sure.
No.
But I'm interested.
No, I remember walking out of there with like tops for my erasers on my pencils. Mm-hmm. I remember walking out of there with instant tattoos, that last a couple of days.
Your parents gotta love that. Yeah.
Oh yeah, my folks were all right with that. They didn't mind that too much. But man, I'm trying to think of other stuff that really just there
were stuffed animals for sure, like really cheap stuffed
tons
animals.
Of stuffed animals.
And back in the 80s, like there was this time period where there must have been some movie about like the Tour de France or some kind of bicycle racing. So all these bicycle caps were really popular, and
the ones the arcade games that really, the arcade video games rather, that really stood out to me were the ones that you could get inside of, which are a lot of these Sega ones. For example, there was the motorcycle one where you could sit on the motorcycle and it would go, it would lean. It would lean left and lean right, and as you leaned on it, and you could rev it, the hand thing, and it's great simulation of motorcycle races.
Yeah.
There were also racing ones where you could get inside the cabinet and there was a steering wheel and a massive screen. I think, in fact, at that Fun Spot arcade up in New Hampshire, which again is unless something's changed, it's the largest arcade in the world. Check it out if that's near you. It's not near me, unfortunately. Otherwise, I'd probably spend a lot of time in there, to be honest.
Check out for sure.
Just between you and myself, Chuck. But oh shit, what was I saying? I lost my train of thought. Dang it. Okay. So yeah, you could get inside it, and there were also ones like with Jurassic Park. There were lots of zombie games where you could have rifles and guns, and you just like House of Terror or House of Horror or something like that was one of those games.
I remember the Paperboy game that had the actual bike, handlebars.
Oh no shit.
Yeah, that was it. Was a lesser, kind of enhancement, but it went a long way for me. I really enjoyed that part of Paperboy. Paperboy was fun for me,
but difficult.
Very difficult.
It was a challenging game,
especially at the end there, and as you got through the levels, it got worse and worse. The bees and the remote control cars and the whole scene, but.
That was a great game, man.
Really good game.
See, I knew there were games that would come back to you that stood out from the arcade. For me, the number one game, I mentioned it already, is any of the Metal Slug games. Those games were huge for me. They were so much fun. I would just dump quarters into that. And even when I moved to Mexico as a little kid, they had when I'd go to the tortilleria to get tortillas for breakfast. I think, and this is the experience of any little kid. Little Mexican kid, and especially in small town Mexico, like the papas they send you to the store to get tortillas, and inevitably, man, you'd end up getting you get the tortillas, and then with the rest of the pesos, you just start dumping them into the arcade games that they have here. Yeah. When I was a little kid here down here in Mexico where I live, not anymore. There's not a single arcade game here anymore, but right across the street from the primaria, which was the elementary school I went to, there was a store, and they had 3 or 4 cabinets in there, and we were talking, and it happens to be the 3 games that are burned into my memory. Uh-huh. It was Metal Slug, Street Fighter 2, and then I think it was Marvel versus Capcom.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Man, and one of Metal Slug, of course, is a side-scrolling shooter, and then the other 2 are beat 'em ups, but. Man, so much fun on those games. It's like the Metal Slug, what's burned into my memory about that was just how well it flowed, and the voice of there's like a voice actor that whenever you picked up a new gun, his voice would come out loud and clear. So there'd be all this action, just like, and then you'd pick up a new gun, and it'd be like, heavy machine gun.
Dopamine surge.
Flamethrower. Then you save a dude and you'd be like, thank you. So just a really unique sound profile that burned that game into my memory. Yeah. Love it to date. I could play it anytime. Street Fighter 2 speaks for itself. Yeah. That game, blew up. And then Marvel vs. Capcom, I think it was, or Street Fighter, I don't remember. I think it was Marvel vs. Capcom, which was where all the superheroes would fight against the X-Men and so on and so forth. Man, that game was so much fun because that was the game that me and my little buddies would go across the street from the school, and we'd both go in there and start dumping pesos and just going at each other. That was one of those games where you'd take the joystick and just do 360s on it, and you're hitting the buttons, just going, come on, come on, just cranking on the until
it's one way to learn to play. Just hit buttons
and just smash buttons, dude. I don't want to bang on the table, but I'm getting excited over here. And it almost makes me want to just go drive to the closest arcade. Not going to happen. Not going to happen.
I definitely have them maybe I misunderstood your question a little bit earlier. I was focusing on games that ate my quarters up, but as far as ones that are hammered into my memory, it's definitely those. Like we mentioned, the better games that cost more money. Like for some reason I remember those, more than anything. But I think just your daily driver, my go-to or whatever. I was right there in the 80s with the sort of that. I think of Tempest was a game that I played a whole ton. They were Frogger, Donkey Kong, and Pac Man were all in this arcade. So they were the standard ones that you kind of. Your meat and potatoes, that kind of feeling. Yeah. And then we would go.
Classics.
Dragon's Lair was the biggest, it was a laser disc game that was at our arcade. And this is in our hometown arcade. And yeah, I don't know if you saw any of these games. It's kind of a different sort of thing. It's not like you're fully in control of your character at all times. It's kind of like you walk into a scene almost from a movie or cartoon, and if you push the right direction at that time, at the right time, it'll show a certain movie. And if you don't, it'll show another movie. and it's
sounds boring as fuck, man.
It is a bit, but it also like it's very complicated and it's very visually stimulating too. Like you kind of are in a cartoon, but yeah, it loses something for sure.
Yeah, it sounds like there's slow gameplay.
Yeah, and
kind of slow gameplay.
I think I sent you some information about it at our mall arcade. They had like the sequel from the same people that made Dragon's Lair. They made a game called Time Traveler, and it was like a hologram.
I did see that.
Yeah, and it was supposed to be the future of video games, and it was, I want to say, $1 to play, and it was kind of the same sort of situation almost. You know, it still had that was how it worked. Like if you picked the right thing, it showed a certain series of things, and if you didn't, it showed something else. And yeah, that just wasn't that exciting. But you know, I remember being really good at Donkey Kong. Like it was probably like my claim to fame as far as you know, where I, you know, my, you know, skills showed themselves, you know, and got that all important, like putting your name in the, you know, your initials in there by the high score is like, you know, I remember those moments for sure.
Dang, man, I'm trying to Dragon's Lair. Is that what you were talking about? Dragon's Lair?
And Time Travelers, like
dude, that was released by Cinematronics.
It's a different kind of game. It was supposed to sort
the company that my pops worked with back in the day.
And you have to realize that we were in that age, like where we video, like VHS and Beta were the tapes, and you were starting to see laser disc players, and there was this record-size CD of sorts that, you know, were the highest tech of the time, and that's what was in these machines.
Yeah, Dragon's Lair was released in 1983 on Laserdisc. I'm trying to. I think the name of the game that they released when my pops was working with them was Space Wars. But that was from 1977. It's all good. Anyways.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting story. And you know, I think it would be interesting for you to kind of explain like what was it like at the mall arcade? Like what was the money that in Mexico that went into the machine? Like which coin? Like
peso.
So it's way cheaper, right?
Way cheaper, man.
Way cheaper. Wow. How did they afford?
I mean, back then. Well, but this is back in the 90s.
So the exchange
this
rate
would have been the late 90s. This would have been the mid-late 90s. You know, Mexico, I think back then it was like 10 or 11 pesos to the dollar.
So it was about 10 cents, right? Like is what that was costing you?
Yeah, back then around that.
Yeah, that's a deal, man.
Dude, yeah.
And
fucking making it right.
Yeah. And like the bigger machines, like were they like 4 pesos or how did they?
Well, there weren't any. You know, like there were just those 3 or 4. Now, but when we would go to the bigger city, either of the larger cities that are close to us, is that your dog farting in the background?
It's my dog coughing up a lung back here.
Oh, you can check him out real quick. Is she okay?
Yeah, stand by one. Let me check on her real quick.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, hey, so I going back real quick, I found the name of that game was Ripoff. It was the first co-op playing game, 2 players, Cinematronics. That was it. Ripoff.
Yeah, I think I saw that somewhere. I think that there'd be a funny thing too. Like, I do feel like during that glut time period, there was this period where anything that was super popular, there would be like a not that it's associated with that game, but there would be a ripoff of it, like of sorts, or what I would call the poor man's version, or you could call it the Wish version of it. Like today, as people are always saying, like I feel like Battletoads was like the poor man's Ninja Turtle. Like
yeah, but Battletoads ended up, creating its own space.
Way more than it's a definite.
Whoa,
like,
what do you mean more?
Oh yeah, way more.
You like it more than Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles? What?
I mean, simply because it's my favorite game of like that era. Like I can't, Ark is my favorite video game of all time. But like when I think of console, like of that age, that time period, Battletoads is hard to beat, brother.
Was that on the Sega Genesis or on the
I think it was on the
Nintendo NES?
Nintendo.
The Super
I think
Nintendo?
it was on all like both Super and the regular, but I could be wrong on that.
That was a fun game.
Mostly
I
played
love
it
like.
on emulators.
Was that the game where like you'd like bust an enemy's ass and he'd fly out the screen, kind of?
Well, and like maybe you'd punch him twice and it would be normal, and then the third one is like a fist that's like bigger than both of you, and you know that it's just like it's executed so perfectly. It kind of it's almost in that Duke Nukem territory where it's just perfect. You know, like of the way the cartoon kind of goes, like somehow like there's just something.
There's something there that
Yeah.
the finesse there for you.
Yeah, it just
Copy that.
Oh, it's so satisfying.
Yeah, man. So, yeah, peso. I mean, not all of them were 1 peso. You'd find 2 peso, 5 peso, and they'd be marked. You'd be able to tell. A huge arcade experience that I got to have. I mean, really, my first arcade experience were in the U.S. My very first ones, the ones that I look back on warmly. With my parents, with my grandparents. Going to places like Shy's Cafe, going to places like Abby's Legendary Pizza or Pizza Hut, or just all of these places would have video game arcades. They'd have little sections or little separate rooms, or they'd be lined up against a certain wall, and these locations would be very familiar to us as kids. Like going to see this family member in a way meant this thing where we knew, oh, we're going to see. That means we might get to go to Abby's and we might get to play video, or we'd go to the movie theater. Movie theaters were another location where they'd have a whole section with all these all these cabinet arcade games, and there'd be just all this stuff again. I don't want to rehash it all out again, but here in Mexico, it's still there. I don't think anyone really goes to it. In fact, I might go check it out just for shits and giggles, just for nostalgic purposes, just to look at it now in my 30s and reflect back. But there's a huge arcade down here called Recorcholis. And when they opened the big mall here in the city close by, they put a Recorcholis in it, and it was huge, man. And this was when I was still in high school, I think. And I was in middle school. And it was, we'd do the drive, the 1 hour drive, just to go to this place. Because, man, it was impressive. I remember going not to compare, but I would, think back on arcades that I'd been to in the U.S., and then I'd look at what they had built at this Recorcholis and just be like, damn, I've never seen anything in the U.S. like this, dude. It's like they were pulling out all the stops for these arcades, huge arcades, bowling alleys inside, all the air hockey tables, pool tables, ping pong, all of the older classic type arcade games, and then all of the new stuff as well. From our 80s and 70s, like 70s and 80s Pong, Space Invaders, Asteroids, all of those games, all of the beat 'em ups, all of the phases of arcade games were in this Recorcholis. Wow. And they also had the tickets and the rewards and the food and the bar, and just, it was, man, I loved going to this place.
Still coin operated at that time? Or?
All coins.
And still a peso.
Oh yeah, it was all pesos.
And the change, did they have change machines? Like would you put a 20 peso note in the change machine or something? Or
exactly. Yeah. Yeah, man.
That seems really affordable. Like in comparison,
it wasn't.
It was. Yeah.
You just spend more coins.
I could see that. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, that little economy that we were talking about, you were going to take it as far as you could, I'm sure.
Well, yeah, I mean, ultimately, I don't remember with precision, but it's spendy. If you're a parent and your kid wants to go to the arcade, you're not gonna. It's gonna take some bucks.
Yeah, even at the casino now.
Well, back then, yeah. I mean, not nowadays. You just get him a console. Yeah.
I guess I started to say there at the casino I saw they'll have penny slot machines, and ultimately you end up spending as much money in those. You end up betting, $1 at least, and it goes pretty quick. So yeah, I could see how that would work. But Yeah, that's interesting to me. And I guess today, if a video game was sitting out somewhere, would it still be a peso in Mexico, you think? Or
no, not unless. See, that's kind of like the thing. That's the thing. Like the only places left where you can go and play cabinet video games, arcade games, are these specialty places, or like the ones that survived. You know, the ones that have made it and pushed through all of the waves of difficulty and lack of popularity and interest going in other directions with consoles, high stakes PC gaming. You know, PC gaming is a whole thing that we haven't really had an episode on yet, except the Intellivision. Mm-hmm. You know, so I'm sure I could find places out there, but it's going to be like an art. It's going to be a business where they have these machines that maybe I can play for a peso or 2 pesos or 5, but it's definitely not going to be their main business. It'll just be like, you know, a couple of side machines on the side of their actual main business, which would, you know, maybe a restaurant or something. That's a good question, Chuck. I don't know.
Yeah.
If I could find, if next time I go to the city, I'll swing by where I used to go to play arcade games in the city, and I'll see if they're still there. And if they're still there, I'll take a look at what they cost, 2022, and I'll let you know. And we'll bring that up in the next episode.
Yeah, I'd love to.
But, you know what, Chuck? I made it to the arcade. I made it.
Yeah, could you take that
You're not gonna
microphone
believe
with you and like do a little
100 pesos?
Damn. I'm racking my brain like just, you know, times I feel like at maybe the grocery store in the bigger cities there, I've saw maybe a claw machine or two, and you know, kind of like more like in that area where you first come in.
Well, you've also been coming down here for quite some time, so you got to experience the same stores that I did back in the 90s, man.
Yeah.
Just like you've experienced the, you know, now when you come and visit, you know, we go to Costco. What? You know, Costco wasn't there back in the day. I mean, hell, half of the town that we're in here didn't have power.
Yeah.
Now it's like things have changed hugely here.
Yeah, that's the point of this episode, folks. Like electricity, it's no joke. Once it's involved, it's game on.
Yeah, I think if I had to drop a final point to wrap up this awesome episode, it's that arcades are a huge part of my childhood. They really are. And when I say arcades, I don't mean these massive mall arcades that you know, that are now a relic and that are slowly, well, quite rapidly actually disappearing. You know, they're definitely a part of my childhood and growing up. And when I say arcades, I mean all of them, whether it's in a little restaurant or in a little, you know, bar or whatever, or in a little pizzeria, or a huge massive arcade. Just the experience of walking up to a cabinet arcade game and popping in that quarter and hearing watching all the lights light up and the sounds activate, and you know, it saying Ready Player One and hitting the button and here we go. It's just like that whole experience, man. Even though now, you know, as adults, much older, you know, I don't know if we would still feel that same joy, but at least it's in there. It's inside of me. So if there's anything I would close this episode on, it's if you've never experienced that before and you have time and then there's an arcade that's not too far away, or if you ever get an experience to go to a place where there's an arcade close by, check it out, you know, and just have fun.
Yeah. I couldn't
it's
agree
something
with you more.
Special.
It is, and I feel like you know, there are like some places pretty close to me that the concept now I think is to combine it with something else, maybe like a bar or something, or somewhere to eat, and I think most of these places run on the like you pay $10 to play as long as you want, you know, kind of thing, and I think those experiences are out there for folks, and I would
it's
certainly
not the same though,
and I also think too, like it isn't. I agree. I would almost rather they gave me the quarters, and you know, like I went through that you know, sort of process. But
you've already tackled that and gotten past it.
Yeah, and I feel like sharing it with a buddy. Like I feel like you kind of said that, like I do feel like if I came down there and said hey, I'm pretty positive I could destroy you at Street Fighter, like like you'd be like, we'll see.
Oh, what? Yeah, let's go see if Record Chili's still open. Joder la chingada.
Yeah.
I'm just kidding.
Yeah. That can...
Vámonos pues, Street Fighter.
And that's one of the beautiful things about video games. I remember, like, one of the things that stuck out to me was like they used Pac Man as an example that brought, like, executives and these older folks of the 70s, into it and stuff. And I think that's one of the cool things, like how it can. Yeah, just it's almost like it's like once you've put that quarter in, it's a license to be a kid again, for a minute, and I think that's really hard to find those opportunities in this world, So I certainly encourage folks to look for that.
Yeah, I mean, if you've never experienced it, go check it out. If you have like little kids or something and you're a parent, it's certainly a good idea. Like that'd be something really fun that you could go do with your kids. Find an arcade that maybe has like a pizza joint attached to it, or I don't know, a bowling alley or bumper cars, or who knows, miniature golf. Sometimes these places will come paired up, and it's a wonderful experience, man. I am so grateful. I'm so happy that I got to experience an arcade, a video game arcade, pre-cell phones, pre-cameras everywhere, pre-knowing where my parents were. I know that sounds messed up, but just like there's so much to that. These are places where we would go to have fun, to flirt, to get our hearts broken, to challenge other teens, to get our school clothes, and there's just so much to this. Like, I mean, yeah. At this point, it's like, all right, I get it, Ovox. Shut the hell up, man. I'll take my kid already. God, yeah, do it. Take your kids.
Do it.
And if you don't have any kids, but you've never experienced yourself, it'd be something really fun. Just get after it. Go check out an arcade. It's fun. You'll kill some time there.
Yeah, you won't regret it.
All right, 100%. Yeah. Well, shoot, what else you got, Chuck T? Anything else, man? How's your ARC life going?
Oh, geez. It's been going pretty good. It's dominated my playing style today. I definitely had an interesting day yesterday in ARC. I had kind of a PvP encounter there that kind of, it was pretty exciting.
You got on Fjordur?
Yeah.
On the new map?
Yeah, I was down on Fjordur, and I was looking for a baryonyx, and I just happened to kind of look over, and I saw him first. It was somebody pretty far away, and they were on a snow owl. And I'm pretty sure it's the guy I let pass the time before. So I was kind of like, your time's coming, buddy. And
oh shit.
Yeah. So he took off on the
just for reference, fellow gamers, a baryonyx is one of the dinosaurs in ARC that you can capture and tame, but it's also a very dangerous animal to capture and tame. So you were looking for baryonyxes
in the swamp on Fjordur, which is kind of this dark
it's
area.
A miserable place to be.
And I saw this trap that somebody had built there, and that kind of thing. And then, like I say, I saw somebody there one day, and I had a bunch of stuff on me, and I kind of had a bunch of stuff this day, but I just knew that I was on my dragon, and he was on a snow owl, which was a pretty good.
You would win.
Yeah. But what happened was he started trying to run for it, and I started trying to wet him down, with the special ability of the dragon that I had, and it throws hot water, and I kind of burnt my stamina up doing that, and it wasn't hitting him, that snow owl's pretty quick, like far as maneuverability. It's not fast like in flat out speed, but it can turn pretty quick, and so he'd get out of the way, and
little hummingbird.
Yeah, he would hummingbird himself out of the way there, and so I had to get away from him to get stamina. And when I first landed, I thought, man, what if he's got a sniper or something and he picks me off the back of this thing? So I readjusted. I got further away, and I got my stamina back, and I went where I thought he was, and he was on the ground over there, and he had put his snow owl up, and he had his RG out, and he had put it on aggressive, and he had a shotgun and a microraptor. He had a microraptor on his shoulder, so he threw the microraptor like to get me or whatever, and luckily, like I got him real good with the water and a good bite, and I just like killed him instantly, and the microraptor got me right after that. Oh. And he got two shots in on the dragon, like I was still on the dragon while he was still living, so the microraptor knocked me off, but it was no problem. I mean, there was nothing, like the RG was hitting me, but it wasn't enough to kill me. Like it was hurting me, but I knew I was going to make it. And I got back on the dragon and killed that RG too, and the microraptor. And yeah, he took
all his shit.
Yeah, it was already on my dragon. I stopped to go get it. He had a boat that he had built like a little base on, and he got back on that boat and started running for it. And
oh, dude, that was the guy that wanted to ask if we wanted to be tribe mates. you savage, man.
It's PvP. He was ready, dude. He was ready. I mean,
it's PvP.
If that microraptor had gotten me just a little sooner, like he had a decent shotgun, I mean, he would have got me. Like, so it wasn't. You know, I thought about that. I thought about even taking some of his stuff back, but later on I was kind of like, you know,
PvP, baby.
Yeah, he put that thing on.
Red is dead.
He squared up like I saw him over there. You know, he was out there ready to fight. Like, so he had a shotgun out. I was like, all right. I mean, it took a lot of time to go get them dragons. Cool. He could have done the same thing. He was the same level as me. You know, I had to, like, you got to go knock out other dragons, get the primal crystal off of them, and it's a hassle. So, you know, I mean, I felt like, you know, he could have done the same thing I did. It just it takes time. But yeah, it was exciting, dude. I guess like the thing, we don't want to bar listeners with all the ins and outs of this, but just that instant, like I don't even know that I ever remember my heart beating like that at the arcade. Like maybe when you're about to, kind of get through a boss that you hadn't, but there's something about that PvP that, oh my Lord. Like, I mean,
yeah, man, it does get your heart going.
Oh, instantly. Like, I mean, it's just, it's very similar to hunting and hunting experiences I've had in real life. Even like, when you're sitting in a tree stand for hours and you finally see a deer, like you get that, like, just that jolt, like somehow. And like, once it happens, like you're in a different world, you're in fight or flight mode. And yeah, it's exciting, but, yeah, it was fun. But other than that, just playing Ark and a little bit of Call of Duty, Warzone, that kind of thing. It hadn't nothing to really write home about there. But anything else going on with you that you've been playing? You still in the Dying Light? Or?
I think we should wrap this one up. It's getting close to 2 hours. Do you have any final comments for the listeners on arcade games?
Yeah, no, I think we really, really covered it, and it might be something. I don't know that it's completely dead. I think those retro folks will keep it out there alive, and there are a few machines like Golden Tee, I think, and Dance Dance Revolution that still are out there.
Gosh, man, there's some videos of kids playing Dance Dance Revolution, man. Their feet move so fast.
Dude, have you seen the guy that does two players? He does 2 players. Like, he puts up on that little handlebar and
like clenching his ass cheeks and just watching them legs just fucking go.
He's nailing it. It's like perfect. Like, it's like,
great moves.
Yeah.
Oh man, that's funny.
Yeah,
I remember trying that game at Recorcholis, actually, at that arcade I was telling you about down here in Mexico. I suck at it.
Yeah, I do too.
I suck at it. I'd hit getting one movie. Yeah, I'm dancing. Yeah, and then someone badass would come up and just be like,
yeah.
You're just like, fuck.
Yeah, it's the one to people watch, kind of like, and I find that I loved that clip from Fast Times at Ridgemont High. I think that whole thing, like, you know, kind of sets that mood. And if you watch that whole thing, like right before that, they show all the food court, like all the stuff that's being made there to eat. And
man.
Yeah.
The smells, the sounds, the lights.
Yeah. Yeah.
Try to find one and go to it.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Well, dude, This has been a wonderful episode. Listeners, again, we hope you enjoyed this episode on arcades and arcade games. Definitely show us some love on your favorite podcast app if you like the content. And you can count on us being back for another episode here in about 2 semanas, 2 weeks. In fact, we should do another DLC episode.
I think it's time.
It is time. We should do another DLC episode. That's been really fun while we brainstorm our next topics. Ladies and gentlemen, fellow gamers, non-gamers, PvEers, PvPers, and even NPCs, this has been the New Wave Gaming Podcast, and we love you and shit. Chuck
Peace
T.
out. Love you guys. See you next time.
Awesome. See you next time, man.